And welcome to the Filmistine podcast, a podcast where we are challenged with trying to articulate a love for art and storytelling. Today I am joined by my boyish friend, Lucy.
Hello, everyone.
Thank you very much for being here. I'm glad everybody could join us, because today we will be talking about Richard Linklater's 2014 seminal film, Boyhood. There's a lot I like about this film. It's very gimmicky, of course. And with that gimmick, it can be kind of mesmerizing. And it no doubt reminds me of Christopher Nolan's Memento. I can't think of another film that rests on its gimmick more than these two. But I think Boyhood does something very interesting with its coming-of-age structure. Because I think at first glance, you have this very checked out kid. He's maybe not very alienated like our kid from Dee, but he is by and large just present. Which, coming from a troubled household and watching his mom make a series of bad decisions, it's not all that surprising for him to be mostly reserved. And it does kind of feel like it's going to amount to something, but it really doesn't. And I think that is one of the really cool things about this film, is that the lessons learned and coming of age curriculum kind of comes through what Mason experiences more as a spectator of what his mom is going through. His mom goes through all the problems, so Mason doesn't have to, in a way. His mom even states very explicitly the major theme of the film, in that she thought there'd be more to life. So it's really cool to see this kind of parallel narrative happen, even though there's not much of a narrative with Mason. I guess Mason Jr., right? I will say I think it's really funny. I don't know what it is about deadbeat dads wanting to take their kids bowling. I will also say, aside from the kind of parallel narrative we have happening, those two pillars being what Mason is going through and Mason's perspective, it's another coming-of-age film similar to Dee that I think incites maybe more of a slice of life situation. And I'm curious what you have to say about that, because you're very critical of the slice of life vibes we find in some movies. But all in all, it's cool to see good and bad things happen to Mason's mom. You know, really good things happen. She becomes a professor at some point, and she doesn't really find purpose, even though she achieves her dreams. It becomes a little redundant, I guess, hereditarily, because Mason is also suffering from the same soft nihilism, at least some exploration of some existential thoughts. But the rollout from husband to husband, the different visits from Mason Sr. to Mason Jr. going to college, it's all very attractive, and I can't actually believe how long the movie is. It kind of went by really fast, and I'm very curious how you feel about Boyhood.
Yeah, I was actually very surprised with how much I liked this movie. Seeing it, I wish I would have seen it when it came out in 2014, right when we were graduating high school and headed off to college. I feel like this movie would have hit different if I would have seen it at that point in my life. This film is such a deeply generational movie, similar to Dee, but I think stronger. There was something in this film that felt so natural to this period of time, or to the 30-year-olds watching this film. I guess 30-year-olds now, not when the film came out. The dialogue and the character interactions felt more natural, and the progression of it felt more natural as well. Even the set designs looked like they were used in that time, and not taking a kid from today that's never heard of a Game Boy or Britney Spears and trying to get them to replicate a similar feeling to what a kid would have experienced in that time. I hate to use the word gimmick. There's just something schemy and tricky to that word, which I can see in Christopher Nolan films, but in this film, I didn't get that vibe. I think it was just a very well-used technique to represent something long term. This movie doesn't try to put on a spectacle or try to make you feel smart in any kind of way. It's a very soft movie, a very natural movie. I really like the focus of the movie being about life and growing up. These subtle moments in life that define the milestones. You don't remember exactly where you moved to or where you moved from, but you remember not being able to say goodbye to your friends. You don't remember what your dad did for a living, but you remember that time he took you bowling and didn't let you put up the guards. You don't remember your graduation ceremony, but you remember that party you had after with your family, right? You remember that bad haircut you got as a kid, but maybe you don't remember people's reactions because that didn't really matter. The representation of the passage of time, it's very cool. It's very neat. We don't need to go back to when the dinosaurs roamed the earth.
Or Ben Franklin.
But just watching a boy grow up for 12 years is severely more impactful just because 12 years is a lot, but at the same time, it's nothing. Maybe we have different definitions of what a slice of life film is, because there was enough drama in this movie to make it not so slice of lifey. But I will say that those dramatic moments didn't become the central focus of the film, because the film kept going on. And that's almost ironic, because as the film kept going on, it was still so contained that it didn't linger on any moment. I guess the biggest example in the movie of that is Bill's story, specifically with his kids, right? Mason and Sam's step siblings. The mom just leaves them and takes her kids away. And oh my God, are you left with what happened to them? Are they okay? Did they get rescued? How did they turn out? But that will never be answered. The soundtrack to the movie was freaking awesome. If nothing else takes you back in time in this movie, the soundtrack will. When the beginning of the film was Coldplay's song Yellow, I don't know, I felt my heart palpitate a little bit, because that song by itself is already so tender and sad. But hearing it in this movie really set the tone for me. I thought it was an awesome choice. I like that you bring up how long this movie is, because it didn't feel that long. I almost wish we could have gotten another 4 years of Mason's life through college. Simply because that's a time when people are still finding themselves. And just to drive home that coming of age moment, I thought the cinematography was very well handled, especially with it being for this long period of time. I can't imagine the thought process behind all this technology booming and growing as you're trying to make a film, and the choices you have to make on what tech to use now and how that's going to clash with what you filmed in the beginning of the movie. I can't even imagine any of that editing process or choices that they had to make. I didn't feel it one bit in the movie. And I think overall this movie is special in a lot of ways. It's a bit more explicit in its message, that the things in life that define us aren't the big milestones, but the moments that surround them. And really, that time flies. And the film shows us this in one of the most visceral ways, because just like watching the film felt like no time has passed, thinking about that time I graduated college or school feels like no time has passed, yet so much time has passed. And it's crazy. I'm glad you brought up perspective and this parallel between Mason and his mom, because I was trying to figure out, in the grand scheme of this film, how that related to each other, because there's something there. I like that you say that Mason is learning from his mom, because although it feels like he doesn't grow much, he does. And I'm not sure how I feel about where this movie ends, but I do like at least what he's trying to say about seizing the moment, yes, but letting the moment seize you, living in the moment. I think that's very important. And especially in this social media age, you tend to lose that sometimes with the FOMO and just having a clear window to everybody else's life, thinking your own life is not where it's supposed to be. Should you be married by 30? But then you have people your own age that are already on their third kid. But then you have the people that are still in school. And it's just so crazy, right? The thing I was missing most from this film was something to hit me hard. Being the prime audience for this film, I was just expecting something more gut punchy. Because I'll definitely say that reflecting on this film was more gut punchy than the film itself.
It's kind of funny for you to say that there isn't a big, here I am, sticking point, that gut punch. Because the film's a little bit of a call to action, I think. I think it's a little bit more than just a gut punch. It's almost this, or I guess can be perceived as this explosive kind of fire put under you to stop letting life go by so quickly, but to also be careful and not to chase life either, but to let the moment seize you, as Mason would say. And I like your point of this lack of closure that Mason gets and Samantha gets, and all the kids out there who have stuff happen to them if they move, if some terrible thing happens to them. Because similar to Dee Dee and anyone else who's ever had friends, you lose friends and then you make new friends. And I think most people often never talk to those really old friends ever again because life just gets in the way. I also kind of think you're hitting on something really important in this film that makes it more timeless than a nostalgic coming of age trip. And it is that passage of time where you can almost imagine Mason, maybe not this Mason's not very charismatic and storytelling, but you can almost imagine Mason at the very end just telling stories about his life. And the audience, of course, inferring that what we just saw over the last 12 years was what Mason is telling this person in his stories.
Yeah, you could almost see him telling his own kid these stories just from that relationship he had with his dad and his dad showing him the importance of communication and maybe having some sort of cycle there.
That's kind of a funny point to bring up too, because that is probably one of the first slaps of maturing kind of resonance when Ethan Hawke's character, Mason Sr., more or less confronts his kids when they're 10, 11, about talking, being a human being. And I guess I'm not sure how I feel about it because it doesn't seem like Mason unlocks that until he sits down with that girl when they go hiking, where it's the first time that he opens up and is just talking about his perspective on life.
I don't know. I think I might disagree with that. I think he does unlock that with his dad and never with his mom or Sam or a friend. They have a brief little getaway when Sam decides to go to a party and not join them, when he's just talking to his dad and asking him questions, and his dad is taking him seriously and answering back. I actually really enjoyed a lot of the interactions they had with their dad, and almost this redeeming character act Mason Sr. experiences. We don't really know, right? This isn't his story, and we don't even get Mason's perspective because he doesn't live with him. But we get a glimpse into his future through Mason, and he's got a family. He's got a kid that he's sticking around for. He almost matures in a way, or at least through Mason's eyes, he matures in a way.
No, certainly. And of course, thematically and symbolically, when he sells his GTO car He gets a more stable job. Mason Sr. kind of walks a similar line to Mason's mom, where we just have more of young Mason just processing two young adults figure this out so he doesn't have to, in a way. Because we also get that other side of the coin where Mason's mom was expecting more out of life. Mason's dad suggests, what else is there? What could you want more than each other and love and family? And I know you mentioned a minute ago you may have wished this film went into Mason's college career life. And cinematically and story-wise, I get that totally, but it's almost, I dare say, antithetical to Mason's point of joining the presence of life right now instead of almost waiting, maybe more along the lines of chasing what comes next. And I suppose that point is over the top, but I do like it. And I am very glad that they ended it right there.
No, that's a fair point. I guess I just wanted to see the repercussions of Mason seizing the moment. Does he actually seize the moment, or does life kick him down? Because, man, college is either a time to shine or a time to get your butt kicked, depending on what major you pick, right?
Oh, it definitely kicked his butt. Mason ended up being a crazy conspiracy theorist or deeply, deeply emo.
I don't know. Some of those art majors really have a fun time in college. But more than anything else, I was just invested in his life now. You show me the life of a person for 12 years, and this is an actual human being. This is Eller Coltrane from the ages of 7-ish to 19-ish, but it's him. It's not makeup to make him look younger or older. It's not a special effect. It's not a different actor to play him. It's him, and I'm watching him on the screen. So that investment was there just to see what happens to him. You can't help but to put yourself in those shoes, because you know what happened to you, but what happened to him? Was it similar to what I experienced?
No, for sure. I think it scratches something deeply primitive in us. I don't think it's completely unlike watching Meredith Grey in Grey's Anatomy. And on top of that, we're also basically waiting the entire movie for something to happen with Mason. And nothing ever really does. Because kind of to your point earlier, a lot does happen in that, Mason is uprooted from different families. He's dealing with the abandonment of his dad. He's dealing with his dad sticking around with a different kid. Not Mason, but a different kid. Of course, he finds a girlfriend, goes to college. But to your point of, they do just kind of feel like memories. It's just a memory soup of a bunch of kind of pointless threads. Nothing adds up outside of, I guess, our silver-platter themes from the parents.
Yeah, and I guess that's where the slice of life genre can be a bit confusing for me, because these are slices of Mason's life. Nothing happens in the way that Mason is troubled by moving and losing his friends, or he's trying to understand the divorce of his parents and what that means. We don't get any of that. So I could see it being a slice of life from that point of view. But then I also think slice of life films are just people doing one specific thing in one specific place and time. A literal slice in their life, like Dee Dee, like the Florida Project. Not necessarily over time or quite as many things happening.
Slices of life. I definitely understand your, I guess, maybe struggle of seeing the point of some slice of life films. They're often predicated on the meandering about without purpose, right? You have to find meaning in that, much to Perfect Day's point. And like you were just saying, it's kind of funny, everything to do without Mason's parents on screen is him just meandering about being a teenager, being a kid.
Yeah.
And I agree, it comes off very natural and maybe realistic. I think it's a little more timeless and universal than something like Dee Dee. I don't think it necessarily applies to the folks of the early 2000s. There's something very amorphous and maybe a little surrealistic about slice of life films, and just the question of why, and them often requiring so much of you to, I guess, fill in that blank.
No, that's a great point, and that has the potential to be so risky because the physical act of watching a film has so many variables. You have to be in a certain mood, in a certain state of mind. It matters who you're with, who you're watching with, where you're watching at, even the size of your TV, the volume of your speakers.
What time of day?
What time of day, yeah, of course.
I like watching films on my phone.
Well, David Lynch is rolling in his grave because of you right now. And so for a film to require so much out of you is risky. Not only that, you're also requiring things of the audience after watching the film. And how many people do that? How many people reflect on what they just watched? It's homework. Slice of life films are homework films.
Absolutely. And I do think a lot of films, most films maybe, try to meet you halfway by manipulation of different techniques and nostalgia and just graphic natured stuff, right? And I don't know, maybe that's one reason I'm kind of drawn to the slice of life nature of filmmaking, because it's almost like it's explicitly asking me, what can I bring to the film more than other genres?
I know I mentioned how natural this movie feels, and I can't state enough how these little moments were just so good, and how because they were filmed at the time where that moment, that thing was a moment and thing, they come off better. Like the pig Latin. Like when they were mimicking their teacher saying apple quit. Like kids saying the Pledge of Allegiance and then the Pledge of Texas? I don't know. Do they still do that? That's cool. They're like little nuggets of time. And I think something a film like Dee Dee really missed, because there's that fear of being politically correct or having to be inclusive, having to be diverse. Because can you imagine a film today making fun of a special needs kid that lives down the street like this movie did? I don't think so.
Yeah, there's something definitely to that, especially in kind of what you're saying about our actors, our kids being the same age as our characters. And again, it just feels like it might scratch this primitive thing we have in us. Without knowing, we all kind of know and relate. At least those from this time period, the people who graduated high school in 2013, 14, or 15 maybe. Because that's obviously the gimmick I spoke of earlier. And yeah, I agree, it's less of a gimmick, at least in the kind of icky way that Christopher Nolan likes to use, or at least in Memento.
And Inception.
Where there's no point to a Memento or an Inception, and there is no doubt something deeply special about that point.
There was a scene that I had a small problem with. I'm curious how you felt about it. It was pretty small, but it didn't feel small. And it's that scene where Mason, Sam, and Mom are at a restaurant and they run into that Hispanic looking guy that the mom encouraged him to go back to school, and he did, and he became a manager now or something. That was probably the most bizarre thing in the film. And I've been trying to rack my brain on why. What are we trying to say about the mom?
I completely agree. I'd forgotten about that, actually. that is weird because it's actually one of the more cinematic, traditional storytelling movie moments we have, because there is just straight up setup and payoff. And it does stick out like a sore thumb. Because other than her talking to that dude, installing like a French draining pipe or whatever, and then they see him at the restaurant and he's like on top of the world, right? Aside from this kind of traditional movie storytelling setup and payoff, Mason's parents don't really communicate with like the outside world. Mason's mom's moments in the film are mostly relegated, maybe entirely, to family moments inside the house, dealing with her husband, dealing with her kids.
Yeah, the only other non-family interaction is when she meets Bill.
But Mason's there.
And then ends up marrying him, yeah.
And I suppose Mason is tangentially there when she's talking to the two guys installing the drain or whatever. But the camera, the film is focused entirely on this interaction between those two, his mom and the Hispanic dude. And I guess kind of to that point, they do, on some meta storytelling level, deal with it in a funny way when that dude's at the restaurant. Mason and his family are also there. The guy comes up and says, thanks, you changed my life. She's very awkward about it, because it is a very awkward thing even for the audience, because it's just like, what's going on here? Like,
who are you? The only thing I could think of was that it was a sort of cautionary tale to listen to your mother. Because I think he literally tells Mason and Sam that your mother's a genius or something along those lines, a very smart lady. But that doesn't fit with anything.
Yeah, that's not the point to anything.
I'm glad you feel that way, because it did completely take me out. And just because we did bring him back to thank the mom, it felt important enough to the film, at least. Maybe not to us.
No, absolutely. If they felt the need that needed payoff.
Was it a try to give the mom, Olivia, more character depth than what Mason sees her as? She's not just this defeated character towards the end there, but she only views herself that way, and Mason views her that way, and through Mason, we view her that way. I don't know. It felt too weird, too off for me to get a clear meaning of it.
Yeah, that's kind of funny to say, too, because a lot of the adults, maybe every adult in this film, is jaded.
Yeah, even his teachers reflect some of that jadedness towards him.
Yeah, they're all kind of checked out and just on autopilot, because that is what adulting is. Because I was kind of thinking, man, the men in this movie kind of suck. Bill sucks. The third husband is kind of just another younger Bill. Mason's dad's a little bit of a deadbeat that has some kind of redemption arc on some level, but he still has another kid, and now Mason on some level has to negotiate what that means in his life. I guess I wasn't that important for my dad to stick around. That's what Mason's thinking. Yeah, it kind of reminds me of Donnie Darko, or these films where they treat the adults with this weird energy, and it creates nice, oftentimes interesting at the very least, kind of divides between generations, because that existentialism Mason is experiencing and questioning the status quo of society and how things are can very quickly lead to a cynic.
So is that what emo kids are? Baby cynics?
They are melodramatic cynics. He's a good mid-2010s emo, right? The emo era has died. The scene era is even dead. And we're kind of left with these armchair philosopher emo type folks, right? At this point in time, 2014. There's a lot of cringe also, I think, in this film. But this is also the kind of film that makes me think, some cringe is cute and charming. Unlike Dee Dee, where it's painful, like gutturally painful. There's also a charming side to some cringe.
How did you feel about Samantha? I can't help to bring up Dee Dee as a comparison to this movie, right? And in that film, we had this bittersweet relationship towards the end with Chris and his sister, and she was going off to college. She's gonna miss him. And who knows what Chris is thinking. But in this film, we sort of drop Samantha. Almost like we didn't know what to do with her character. Because of the nature of this film, we don't have that character confrontation, those kinds of dialogue moments, right? So maybe I missed something there. But she seems so front and center in the beginning of the film.
No, there's definitely something to that, and the inclusion of Samantha I don't think is obvious to a specific point. I think it serves the passage of time probably more than anything, in that, yes, Samantha and Mason are kind of front and center and stuck at the hip in the beginning, first third of the film, maybe first half. But similar to pretty much anything else that happens in your life, you look up at one point and think, what happened? Where did the time go? Yada, yada, yada. Not unlike when Mason is in high school, you're just like, man, where is Samantha? You know, she's been gone for like 40 minutes. I think Samantha might serve this point, to this cinematic point, this universal point, to allow us, the audience, to know that Mason is taking center stage. He's about to blossom in some way or another. Because there is something right in that it's about Samantha and Mason in the beginning. Because they're 7, 8, 9 maybe. And as Mason becomes more thoughtful, he stays pretty much consistently reserved, I think. Even as a child, he's pretty reserved. But he becomes more reflective and thoughtful on whatever matters. And I think cinematically it is a little odd, especially in retrospect, but you might even be surprised by her disappearance by the end of it. And then thinking back on it, you're like, oh yeah, Samantha did just kind of disappear.
No, that's a very good point. I imagine maybe my siblings feeling something similar when I went off to college. Especially my little brother, we were the last two in the house. And me suddenly just dipping out. I was there and then I'm gone for 4 years. Just how instant that can happen, and where's Lucy at?
It's kind of funny because it's so mundane, right?
Yeah.
It plays up the slice of lifeiness so much, but in a strange way, it's also very pointy.
How did you feel about the transitions? I guess we don't get any ages or years. Could we have benefited from title cards? I don't know. But we do see their hair getting longer, or the mom's haircuts. Significant cultural things like Dragon Ball in the beginning, and then we see him playing the Wii in Wii Sports. They felt very seamless, up to the point that I had to shift that now this was a different Mason, a new Mason. Especially in the younger years, where he hasn't blossomed enough that he looks different. You just really have to rely on everything else.
Yeah, there's something really cool about that. It's almost predatory on the intrigue and attractiveness of having to see people when they were younger and now. How many times have you looked up an actor, an old guy, and wanted to see him when he's in his 20s?
All the time.
Or a classmate who you went to high school with, and now you're 60. It's like, what do they look like? There's something very satisfying about seeing that progression, especially such a linear progression that we see here with Mason and Samantha, especially because the mom and the dad, they don't change an awful lot, but the inclusion of the title cards may have been, at best, not additive, and at worst, distracting. Because it would maybe detract a little bit from the discovery of, oh, he's a little older here. Because also kind of to that point, we go some time without seeing Samantha, and then we see her at Mason's graduation party. And when you see her after, not seeing her for 30 minutes, like, oh, you're an adult now. So there's something kind of satisfying about that.
You had red hair. Now you look like a woman.
But all right, man, thank you very much for watching Boyhood with me and talking about it here today.
You're welcome.
Do you have a budget guess?
This was hard to give a budget to, simply because of it being filmed throughout 12 years. I can't even begin to imagine how that happens. How often do you get them back? And as I've been watching film, one of the things you have taught me is that it's very rare to film something chronologically. That could potentially get expensive. So I'm going with 65 mil. We had a lot of moving pieces. We had that 12-year filming. 2 hours and 45 minutes. I don't know. I have no idea.
Well, it says here on the Wikipedia that the budget was about $4 million.
$4 million? Wow. How?
That's pretty wild. It's baffling when films like this are $4 million. I get it's been 10 years now, but Twisters is $200 million.
That's a great point, because you have a movie like here that's also about the passage of time, but that was 40 to 50 million. Then you have this movie that does it way better with way less money.
And it apparently went on to make $57.3 million.
Oh, that's awesome.
And over on Letterboxd with 857,000 people, they weighed in at 3.8.
I'm actually right there with them. I'm debating between a 3.5 and a 4. I would watch this movie again. I think I would enjoy it the second time around. Now reflecting on what this movie has to offer, what it has to say. I like what you said a lot in the beginning. I'm still thinking about it and how it was a call to action movie, a light a fire under you movie. And it'd be great to watch it again with that in mind. Maybe focus a little bit more on Olivia and Mason Sr.
Yeah, they're kind of the brains of the movie.
Yeah.
Which is kind of funny because they're not the perspective at all. They're not the point of what's happening at any moment, really. It's disjointed, the characters are, in a really cool way.
No, I completely agree. And I think that could give me some of that punchiness, watching it with that perspective in mind that I'm looking for. There's also a lot that happens here, right? It's these tiny moments, these subtle moments of life that I would really like to focus on. So maybe a rewatch of this movie can help me really settle on a 3.5 or a 4. Or it goes down. I don't know.
Yeah, it might settle and it might go down. I have that happen occasionally. I try to not let that happen because, like the adults in this film, you don't want your present jadedness to manipulate your past experiences. I'm somewhere between a 2.5 and a 3. It's one of those movies that it's way more interesting to think about and talk about than it is to watch. There's no great performances like a Ralph Fiennes from Conclave, The cinematography is not stylish. It's not particularly overtly special.
Yeah.
The writing's not particularly special, but when you mix all these things together and start thinking about it, it is kind of special. It's a special movie. It has a lot of gas, and it's cooking. And above all else, I guess for me, it's a surprising movie.
Yes.
Being predictable, I guess, isn't necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes it's comfort, right? But being surprising is something completely different.
Yeah, nothing like being taken out of the moment.
But yeah, man, thank you again for watching and talking about this movie. And thank you guys for listening to this episode of the Filmistines. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Remember, we post every Wednesday and Friday on all of our free feeds like YouTube, Spotify, Pandora, Apple Podcasts, and Patreon. Our next episode will be on the wonderful movie, The Lorax.
Was that sarcasm?
So please look forward to that. That will be a very good talk. Remember to leave nice comments, thoughts, and ideas on our Patreon as well. Come subscribe. Come right in. Come request a movie. We appreciate all the support. Thank you guys very much. But until next time, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of the Filmistines. Thanks for tuning in and joining us on our cinematic journey. We hope you enjoyed the discussion and gained some new insights and perspectives on the world of movies. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform, especially Patreon at patreon.com/Filmistines. And follow us on social media for more film-related content. We love hearing from our listeners, so if you have any feedback, suggestions, movie recommendations, or book recommendations, please feel free to reach out to us. Until next time, keep watching and keep loving the magic of movies. This is the Filmistines, signing off.